If you are hearing this, you were supposed to stay in 2019. This is a recovered broadcast. Do not turn this off. You may think this is 2025. You may believe the years have passed, but they have not. The world did not move forward. You were pulled out. You may remember 2019 as the last year everything felt normal.
2019 was 6 years ago, man, and it feels like it was just yesterday. It's almost as if like nearly a decade has come and gone within like the blink of an eye, and I don't know how to comprehend that. I mean, does like anyone else feel like they're in like a weird like time loop? Like some days pass and it just seems like I have no idea like what happened within such a short span of time. I mean, why does time feel so much faster now? I mean, I remember when the pandemic hit and just time seemed to just stop making sense. Lockdowns dragged on for a while, and weeks turned into months, and months into years, and it's almost as if my perception of time was just completely distorted. I remember spending the beginning of lockdowns gaming with friends and making good memories both in college and online, but, you know, some days even those memories feel kinda hazy, like a chunk of my life just vanished. I mean, does this sound familiar? Apparently there was a social consensus that 2020 was basically a blur, and almost like time was just warped for everyone, pretty much. The opening you saw at the start of the video is from a video entitled "You Are in the Wrong Year" by an analog horror channel named Code Red. And if you're a fan of analog horror, I actually recommend checking them out. They've got a lot of good stuff. But in the video, the viewer is informed that the last real year was like 2019. And if you're watching the video in 2025, you're basically living in the wrong timeline. I mean, this video, along with a whole bunch of others that I've seen come into my feed, all kind of echo the similar sentiment of 2019 being the last normal year. Yo, what's going on, guys? I wanted to hit you with a topic today that's been generating some buzz lately, and it's what many people are describing as the 2020 effect. So, what is the 2020 effect? Well, from what I can gather, it seems to be this overall mass feeling of just lost time and a warped perception about reality that, like, a lot of people have been experiencing since coming out of lockdowns that started in 2020. I found this article by neurosciencenews.com called "A Year of Blurs Days: How the C Virus Distorted Our Sense of Time in 2020." And at the time, it was published actually on the last day of 2020. It basically goes on to report that a lot of people felt 2020 basically went on forever, and that time was just kind of slowed and compacted into this small window of reality that a lot of people just didn't know really how to describe. But it's really weird though, because not everyone had a similar experience. Because it seems to be based on the results that out of the 600 people that were interviewed for this, some people said that time felt as if it had slowed down for them, and others felt as if it actually sped up. Now, I had said earlier in a previous video I made that, you know, a lot of things affect your perception of time, especially as you get older, because when you get older, you start to think that time is moving faster. Because, you know, things are more routine, there's not really that many new experiences like when you're a kid. This study was interesting though, because my initial thought about time speeding up the older you got seems to still be true, but with this study it seemed depending on the level of social interaction that people had, younger people actually experienced time speeding up more quickly for them compared to older people, particularly those over the age of 60, who didn't really have a lot of social interaction and were stressed and didn't really have a lot of tasks to occupy them. Which actually makes sense if you think about it, because I guess, you know, if you don't have anything to do, you know, the clock is just going to tick very slowly for you. But with the younger people time speeding up, that kind of plays into what I was saying about as you get older, and, you know, even when you're young and getting older, the time's just going to speed up just because you're staying so busy and you're doing all these things that it's just going to slip right by you. Still a very interesting observation, though. I guess time really is determined by pretty much like how much you're doing and, you know, I guess how many people you're interacting with on a daily basis. And I think, too, that's a big component of all this is just the amount of social interaction people got, because I think so many people were just so insulated from other, you know, people around them that probably influenced, you know, whether or not they thought time sped up or slowed down. But it's still very interesting to see. And I found another article about this too, which I thought was interesting. From Very Well Mind, the perception of time has shifted during C19, new survey reports. And this was actually posted in 2023. They have a section in this article called Why Time is Passing So Strangely, and about halfway through it, one of the guys who's quoted in the article, I believe Dr. Pavan Madan, a psychiatrist, claims that the more new experiences we have, the longer time feels. For example, time seems to pass slowly when you're on vacation, exploring new to you cities or interesting tourist attractions. And the point he makes that I find interesting is he claims, the more emotions a situation generates, the more we remember it. And since many of us are not leaving home, he says we are experiencing less range of emotions, which also reduces the landmarks of time stored into our memory, skewing the perception of time. Additionally, Madan says the transition from weekdays at work and weekends at home is no longer the same. As the hallmarks of our work week change, it makes it more difficult to feel the amount of time that has passed. So basically, with everyone just being inside and not doing as much as they used to, our brains are basically like compartmentalizing this era into like one giant, essentially, box in our mind that, you know, we don't really remember as, you know, we just kind of remember as this long stretch. Because I think a lot of people for the most part were just, you know, kind of just sitting at home, not really doing much. I mean, you had people like, you know, discovering new hobbies and, you know, working on whatever projects that they had more time to work on. But for people who weren't doing much, it was almost as if that whole era was just kind of just like boxed into their brain, and days weren't really distinguishable from other days, and it all just became one giant, essentially, scene in people's minds. And it's interesting because it's almost as if the normality of everyday existence was basically just like turned upside down in an instant, and I personally think things never really recovered from that, because I think there's been a definite reality shift in the past 5 years that I think a lot of people are experiencing. So, what am I really talking about when I say the 2020 effect? So, I think that time has pretty much gone into a blender, because, I mean, since the lockdowns back then, everything has just seemed kind of off, and I feel like I'm not really alone in this. I mean, there's just been a ton of surveys I've found that have showed that people's just general perception of reality was just being skewed during this time. And I think it's just a combination of, you know, people commuting less to work, not hanging out with friends and family, not leaving the house, that just kind of culminated in this giant just sense of things being kind of like just this wipe of time that I think a lot of people aren't really used to, you know, like dealing with and compartmentalizing. And I mean, I felt it myself during this time. When everything was shut down, it was kind of like a giant plug was pulled on everything, and, you know, reality just kind of came to a grinding halt. I mean, I was planning for my future at the end of the 2010s, and then before I knew it, I was stuck inside my house for about a year, you know, wondering if this future I was planning was ever going to actually materialize. And, you know, things have, you know, eased a bit since then, but this haze that's been lingering since then is just not, it's not fully lifted. And I'm wondering if anyone else really feels this too, because it seems to be this just kind of long-lasting effect that a lot of people are experiencing, but are not really, talking about in everyday life. It seems to be more of a thing that's being discussed online. But, the shift pretty much derailed everything, because I think up until that point, having come up in the 2010s, there was a lot of political fragmentation around that time, but, before 2020, there was still kind of, even a little bit after 2016 too, just with, things going on politically, there was still kind of a sense that you could still kind of have a normal conversation with, like, everyday people. Like, I think there was, in the midst of the kind of rising chaos of everything going on, there was still, like, this background sense that of, vibrance and this kind of distinct, subtle feeling of hope that people had for the incoming decade. But, 3 months into 2020, that just entirely flipped the script and just brought in this environment of, like, confusion and isolation and just overall paranoia, I think. And, I've often wished and thought about going back to those days to kind of experience, like, whatever normalcy was left back then. Because, I think people were just more open and willing to just socialize with one another back then too, and I don't think that's really the case anymore. And it's kind of funny thinking about how at the end of 2019 I was really optimistic in regard to the 2020s, because I actually thought it was going to be a decade of just, like, new possibilities and opportunities. And mainly because back in 2019 I had actually dropped out of college to pursue a career in plumbing. I actually wanted to be a plumber because at that time I thought learning a skill, like an actual trade, would be the best way to go moving forward. And college just kind of came off as a gamble to me at that time, because it didn't really make sense to go further into student debt with everything, kind of with the future looking more like it was going to be a hands-on blue-collar future, at least in my opinion. And I had been dating a girl at that time as well who I actually regarded as someone who was willing to marry. And we even considered getting engaged not too long after I left. We had a whole future basically planned out, like just this giant, this giant plan for after we both left school. And, it was kind of a typical, 2010s college experience. I had tons of friends that I hung out with and made memories with that, in my opinion, will last a lifetime. And I honestly believe people on the whole were just livelier and more willing to socialize and engage with one another, despite, how crazy the politics were at the time. In my personal life, I actually think there was this general overarching positive sense that things were just going to fall into place, even if the way they were falling was a little outside many social expectations that had been placed upon me, getting a college education. But even leaving school, I thought things were going to work out. I mean, everything was just, it seemed right. But, as we all know, it happened. And the end of 2019 and early 2020, I remember seeing news reports on Twitter about some virus that had, at the time, allegedly escaped from a bioweapons lab somewhere in China, which I think is actually probably a distinguished fact now, looking back on it. But I was so paranoid about this that I actually just pretty much cut myself off from, like, a ton of people for, like, about a year and just didn't leave my house, because I actually thought this was, like, a civilization disrupting event. And during that time, working odd jobs to get by and essentially putting a pause on my career, mainly because at that time I wanted to be a union plumber. A lot of the unions weren't doing in-person meetings, and the wait list to even, talk to anyone, like a representative, was so long that it was going to be a long time before I had a chance to even, put my foot forward on that path anyway. But just being home for a year and working basically gig jobs, my perception of just reality just got so skewed where days just started to blend into one another, and there was really no way of distinguishing the previous from the next, you know? And, you know, this, I kind of got the sense that free-range optimism and wonder that had kind of permeated throughout the 2010s had kind of officially come to an end. Because a lot of my friends who I used to see regularly lived in different states, and different states during that time had different procedures on how to approach this thing. And I didn't see a lot of them for almost 2 years, a year to a year and a half during that time. And that kind of that desire to just randomly show up at a friend's house or go on a trip or something, or just, you know, pick someone up and do whatever, it was kind of stamped out in a way by, you know, just the massive pressure that was in place at that time to just, you know, shut everything down. And I just, for me at the time, it just seemed like my life was, you know, essentially, it had grinded to a halt, and any chance I had of making any kind of career was basically just up in the air at this point. But, you know, it wasn't... I think a lot of people had kind of a similar experience to me, because I think a good portion of people were just kind of thrust into this situation that, you know, no one had any real control over. And just the lack of interacting with people on a daily basis just kind of altered how, you know, people interact with each other coming out of this. And you can still kind of see it now. I think people are more hesitant now to talk to each other. There's kind of this just weird leftover sense of just paranoia about people, just general low trust in things, especially low trust in authority. And, you know, I even lost friends during this time too, because, you know, there was a lot of argument over a certain kind of medicine that people had to take at the time, and if you didn't take it, you could have, you know, risked losing your job and really just losing, I guess, a lot of things, not just a job, but, you know, even family members or people who you used to know for a long period of time. But I know in my heart of hearts what I know is right, and I did what I thought was best, and, you know, I cut people out of my life who tried to force something on me that I knew essentially was bad for me as a whole. And, you know, it's just something that happens, and you just, you move on. But, you know, it's, going back to the whole perception of time, I think things have just felt generally off for the past 5 years, especially combined with coming out of everything shutting down and the political fragmentation intensifying at an exponential rate. And, you know, with economic uncertainty and people just having this general sense of not knowing how the future is going to play out, I think just the overall combination of, like, the anxiety of all of this is just making people, it's kind of forcing people into a survival mindset collectively. And I don't think we really know how to deal with it long term, so our brain just kind of puts it all basically in a box for us, and we just kind of view it as a giant block of time. But I generally think just because we're getting older as a whole, that time is just speeding up because we're so busy and just stuck in routines at this point. It's hard to deviate from things that are just so established in our daily lives. But what I do keep seeing online talking about this 2020 effect is there is kind of this resurging form of optimism that is refreshing to see, where a lot of younger people, maybe about 5-10 years younger than me or so, kind of are getting the sense that things are just like reopening as a whole, not just, you know, physically with society, but like there's kind of been this mental shift to want to go out and actually experience life again, because people have been, you know, locked down for so long. It's nice to see. It's nice to see that people still want to go out and experience things, because there was a definite social shift, mainly to online interaction, I think, during the last 5 years, because everyone was just so, you know, boxed in. But it's good to see that people still want to make, you know, genuine experiences and actually get out into the world and, you know, interact with it again. And I think whatever ominous cloud that had been hanging over the first 5 years of this decade is starting to lift a bit in certain regards. I mean, there's always going to be a background feeling of anxiety with any era you're living in. But it's good to see that people are willing to actually, you know, take a chance and go back out into the world and do things again. Because I think everyone knows deep down that, you know, time is so short as it is anyway, that you might as well make the most of it while you're here. And, you know, anything can happen on a day-by-day basis, especially now, given, you know, how quick information moves and how quick, you know, things happen and how quickly we find out about them. I think the best thing to do at this moment is, I think a lot of people are just getting out and they're trying to make the most of the time they have now, because, I mean, we don't really know when, you know, when our time is up. So, with all this in mind, time is probably going to feel very different for everyone, depending on who's listening to this or who's watching it. But I honestly think the best thing everyone should do right now is try to get out and just, you know, make some genuine experiences and memories that you'll never forget and that you can positively look back on in your life. Because, I mean, as messed up as the world is and people are at the moment, at the end of the day, you gotta live your life, man, and make it worth living. So, anyone who's hearing this should really go out and do something cool and basically just live life, man. That's all it boils down to. Because, I mean, that's all you can do at the end of the day, right? But, yeah, this is just something I wanted to talk about. I was interested in seeing a lot of stuff on my feed lately in regards to it. I want to thank everyone who's watched and listened to this. It really means a lot. I heavily appreciate you investing time into even engaging with this kind of content. If you could leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the bell notification to stay up on the latest updates, it would mean the world to me. And, you know, just, I'm curious too what you guys think about this whole 2020 effect and just the general kind of warped perception of both time and reality. If you guys have any personal experiences with this, or if it's something that you've been thinking about too, I'd like to hear about it in the comments. Until next time, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and see you soon.